All right, so you ready to dive into some big changes coming to ESO?
You bet. Always ready to dissect the latest news, especially when it's a letter directly from ZOS studio director Matt Firor.
Right. I mean, this studio director's letter, 2025 and beyond, dropped just a few days ago, and it's got the community buzzing.
And for good reason.
Yeah,
We're talking about a major shift in how ESO's content is going to roll out.
the end of an era, really.
He's safe.
Chapters as we know them are gone.
Poof! Vanished.
It is kind of wild to think about, right? Like, we've been on this yearly chapter cadence ever since Morrowind in, what was it, 2017?
2017, yeah. It's been the rhythm of ESO for so long. New chapter, new zone, new story, rinse and repeat.
And don't get me wrong, it's worked. Chapters have brought us some incredible content.
Oh, absolutely. Some of my favorite ESO memories are tied to those chapter releases.
Same here.
Exploring Somerset for the first time, uncovering the secrets of Elsewhere.
Right. But maybe, just maybe, that rhythm got a little too predictable.
A little too comfortable, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think even ZOS realized that.
Well, Firor hints at it in his letter.
He does. Let me see if I can find that exact quote.
It's about the development cycle.
Yeah, right here. He says, this annual cadence pushed the team to focus on short deadlines every June, where all types of content, systems, content, zones, etc., had to be completed at the same time, and has not left us much time for experimentation or thinking about doing things differently.
And that right there is at the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a developer and you're constantly under the gun to get everything done by June every year. Does that really foster innovation?
Probably not.
It's like trying to bake a gourmet meal with one hand tied behind your back. So no more big zones, no more exploring vast new landscapes. That's a pretty big part of what makes ESO, well, ESO.
Hold on. Before you start mourning the loss of new zones, let me clarify something.
Okay, and listen.
They've confirmed that new zone-based content is still very much part of the plan for 2025. What's changing is how they're going to package and deliver that content.
So instead of chapters.
Instead of chapters, we're moving to a seasonal model. Seasons.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. It's a pretty significant shift.
Tell me more.
Well, think of it this way. Instead of getting one massive content dump every June, we're going to get a series of smaller, themed releases throughout the year.
Smaller, but more frequent.
Exactly. Each season will last somewhere between 3 and 6 months, and will have its own unique theme, with a mix of new story content, events, items for the Crown Store, dungeons, and who knows what else.
So we could potentially get new story content, new areas to explore multiple times a year.
That's the idea. It allows for more flexibility, more focused storytelling, and honestly, more surprises.
Because let's face it, with the chapters, we kind of knew what to expect. Come June, boom, new chapter, new zone, new story. It got a bit formulaic.
Yeah, it did. But with seasons, it's like, who knows what's around the corner? We'll have to wait and see what each new season brings.
I like the sound of that. A little less predictability, a little more mystery.
Exactly. Keeps things fresh. Keeps us on our toes.
Now, this is all exciting stuff, but what about the issues that have been plaguing ESO for a while now? Things like Cyrodiil performance, overworld difficulty.
Oh, they're addressing those too, but in a very interesting way. They're calling them experiments.
Experiments. Tell me more about that.
Well, it seems they're finally tackling some of those elephants in the room, those long-standing issues that players have been vocal about. But instead of just rolling out changes and hoping for the best, they're taking a more experimental approach.
Smart move.
Yeah. In the coming year, they're going to be trying out different solutions, testing things in a more controlled environment, and really listening to player feedback to see what works and what doesn't.
So it's like a beta test, but for specific game systems?
Exactly. And they're being very transparent about it. They'll be labeling these experiments in the patch notes so we know exactly what they're testing and how we can provide feedback.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a refreshing approach. So let's talk specifics. What are some of the key areas where they're planning to run these experiments?
Well, buckle up, because they're not shying away from the big ones. Starting with Cyrodiil performance.
The bane of every PvP enthusiast's existence.
Seriously, remember those epic lag fests when the Alliance War really heats up?
Oh yeah, it's like trying to wade through mud sometimes.
Their goal is ambitious, to say the least. They want to get Cyrodiil performance back to 2014 levels.
Back to the glory days, huh?
Right. Their experiment involves testing PvP-specific skills in one campaign to see if it reduces the strain on the servers. They're hoping that by isolating certain skills, they can pinpoint the root cause of the performance issues.
Fingers crossed it works.
Absolutely.
What else is on the experimental docket?
Another big one is overworld combat difficulty.
Which, let's be honest, could use a bit of a boost.
Yeah, for veteran players, it's not exactly the most challenging content.
Not really.
Yeah.
So what are they thinking of doing?
Well, they haven't revealed all the details yet, but their goal is to make overworld combat more engaging, more rewarding, without making it impossible for newer players.
That is a delicate balance.
Yeah, they don't want to scare away new players, but they also want to give veteran players a reason to, actually use their skills out in the world.
Right. Make it feel like those skills matter.
Exactly.
Okay, Cyrodiil performance, overworld combat difficulty. What else is on their list?
Oh, they're also looking at something they're calling combat feel.
Okay, I like the sound of that already.
Think smoother animations, cooler visual effects, maybe even some audio tweaks to make combat feel more visceral and impactful. They're aiming for that sweet spot where every swing, every spell cast feels satisfying and powerful.
I am totally on board with that because combat is such a core part of the ESO experience, right?
Absolutely. If
Yeah.
combat doesn't feel good, then the whole game suffers.
Exactly.
But they're not just tinkering with existing systems, they're also experimenting with brand new content.
Ooh, like what?
Well, one thing they mentioned was high-end group content, like smaller, more focused versions of Craglorn. Yeah. Imagine bite-sized raids, designed specifically for group play and gear progression. It could be a great option for players who love a challenge but maybe don't have a time or the group size for a full-blown trial.
Or maybe they just want a different kind of challenge, something a little more bite-sized.
Exactly. And it also gives ZOS more opportunities to experiment with different mechanics and encounter designs.
So lots for veteran players to look forward to. But what about those just starting their adventures in Tamriel? Or those returning after a break?
Well, they haven't forgotten about them either. In fact, they're making some significant improvements to the new and returning player experience.
Because, let's be honest, ESO-T can be a bit overwhelming at first, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's a massive game with so many systems, so much lore.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost.
It's like being dropped in the middle of a dense jungle with only a compass and a rusty dagger.
So what are they doing to make that initial experience a little less daunting?
Well, for PC players, they're developing a brand new patcher. Not the most exciting thing I know, but it's going to have snazzier visuals and improved performance, which is always a good thing. Plus, they're bringing back the original Wailing Prison tutorial for all new players.
You know, I have fond memories of that tutorial. It did a great job of introducing the core mechanics of the game while also telling a compelling story.
Right. It was a classic.
Yeah.
And to prevent new players from being completely overwhelmed by quest markers, they're going to hide prologue and chapter quest pins from the compass. At least initially. Let them explore, let them discover things organically.
I like that. What else?
They're also giving the starter islands some visual upgrades, which is great because first impressions matter, right?
Big time.
You want those early areas to feel welcoming and visually appealing.
Totally. And what about the rest of us who've been around for a while? Any goodies for us?
You bet. The PC UI is finally getting a much-needed modernization.
It's about time.
Right, they're streamlining things, making it more intuitive, and generally giving it a fresh coat of paint. Plus, they're making improvements to the map and UI to help returning players find their bearings and figure out what they should be doing.
Okay. I like what I'm hearing, but I have to ask, with all these changes, what about the story? Is new quest content still a priority?
Absolutely. Firor was very clear about that in his letter. New quest content is still coming, it's just going to be delivered differently.
So instead of these massive zone-based chapters, we're going to get, what, more focused storylines spread out throughout the year?
Potentially. They're going to be more creative in how they use existing zones and areas to tell new stories. They mentioned continuing existing storylines, bringing back familiar characters, and maybe even splitting a large zone story across multiple updates.
Like releasing it in parts.
Yeah, kind of like an episodic format. It could lead to some interesting twists and turns as the story unfolds over time.
Okay, so chapters are out, seasons are in,
Wow.
and ZOS is experimenting with everything but the kitchen sink. What does this all mean for the release schedule? Like, what can we actually expect in 2025?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, it's hard to say for sure. Things are definitely going to be less predictable.
So no more waiting with bated breath for that June mega update.
Not necessarily. Instead, we can expect announcements and content drops throughout the year.
Okay.
The next big reveal is scheduled for April 2025, where they'll unveil the very first season.
Oh, nice.
But we do get a content update before that in March 2025. The PTS for that update should be up and running in January.
Well, this is a lot to process.
It is.
Yeah.
Chapters fading into the sunset, the rise of the seasons, and a whole bunch of experiments to shake things up. ZOS isn't messing around.
It's a pretty bold move, honestly.
It is.
And it's definitely generated a lot of buzz in the community. Some are excited, some are worried, and some are just plain confused.
Understandably so. It's a big change. But you know what?
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing that ZOS is willing to take risks, to try new things, and to really listen to what the players want.
Yeah, I agree. It shows that they're committed to keeping ESO fresh and evolving, and that they're in it for the long haul. And that's something we can all get behind, right?
Absolutely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
From chapters to seasons, experiments to new player experiences, it's clear that ZOS is shaking things up in a big way.
Big time.
And now, it's time to hear what you all think. What are your thoughts on these changes? Are you excited, apprehensive, somewhere in between?
Head over to our forums, join the conversation on social media, let us know what you think. We'll be back soon to dive into the community's reaction to all of this and share our own hopes and predictions for the future of ESO. Stay tuned.
Well, that was a lot to unpack, wasn't it? Chapters going away, seasons coming in, experiments galore.
It's like they flipped the script on us, huh?
Totally. And as you can imagine, the community's got a lot to say about it all. Oh, they definitely do. The forums and social media have been buzzing ever since that letter dropped.
And rightfully so. We're talking about a beloved game here, one that people have invested countless hours in.
Absolutely. It's like ESO's been part of our lives for years, and now it's like, whoa, things are changing.
Big time. So let's dive into the community's response, shall we? See what people are loving, what they're worried about, and what they just don't understand.
Sounds good to me. Where should we start?
Well, one thing that's really jumped out at me is the overwhelming positivity surrounding the shift from chapters to seasons.
Really? That's surprising. I mean, change can be scary, right?
It can be, for sure. But I think a lot of players felt that the yearly chapter structure had become a bit stale.
Like predictable.
Exactly. It's like you knew what to expect. Come June, boom, new chapter, new zone, new story, same thing every year.
Yeah, it was comfortable, familiar, but maybe a little too comfortable.
Maybe. Players want surprises, they want variety, and they want to feel like they have a bit more say in how the game evolves.
And seasons seem to offer that, don't they? It's like instead of one big feast a year, we're getting smaller, more frequent meals.
I like that analogy. It's like instead of going to an all-you-can-eat buffet once a year, you're getting a delicious 3-course meal delivered to your door every few months.
And you never know what's on the menu until it arrives.
Precisely. It keeps things exciting, keeps you guessing.
I mean, it's a bit like those subscription boxes, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You know you're going to get something cool, but you don't know exactly what it's going to be until you open it.
It's that element of surprise, right?
And the anticipation.
And let's not forget the impact this has on the developers themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the creative freedom they gain by breaking free from that rigid yearly cycle.
Yeah. No more scrambling to hit that June deadline. They can actually breathe, experiment, and polish those new features.
Exactly. It's a win-win for both developers and players.
Speaking of wins, let's talk about those experiments, because that's where things get really interesting.
Oh yeah, the experiments.
People are excited, maybe a little apprehensive too, about the potential for fixes to Cyrodiil performance, overworld combat difficulty, and what was it called?
Combat feel.
Right, combat feel, whatever that means.
Oh, it's all about making combat feel more impactful, I guess.
More visceral.
Yeah.
More visceral. But what's great about these experiments is that they're acknowledging these issues head on, right?
Totally. They're basically saying, hey, we hear you. These things aren't perfect. Let's try some stuff and see if we can make them better.
And they're not just throwing darts at a board here. They're actually being very transparent about the process.
Right. They're saying, here's what we're thinking of trying. We're going to test it out, gather feedback, and see what happens.
It's a much more open and collaborative approach, which I think is great. It makes you feel like, as a player, your voice actually matters.
Absolutely. And even if some of these experiments fail, well, that's part of the process, right?
Yeah, failure is just a stepping stone to success.
Exactly. It's all about learning, iterating, and constantly striving to make the game better. So let's dive into some specifics, shall we? Starting with Cyrodiil performance.
Ooh, yeah, the elephant in the room.
The bane of every PvP lover's existence. The lag, the stuttering, the frustration of trying to fight when your character's moving like they're stuck in mud.
I know, but they're really trying to fix it this time, right?
They are. They've set a pretty ambitious goal to get Cyrodiil performance back to 2014 levels.
Wow. Back to the good old days, huh?
Right. When battles were smooth and epic and you didn't feel like you were playing a slideshow, their experiment involves testing PvP-specific skills in one campaign to see if it reduces the strain on the servers.
Okay, so like isolating certain skills to see if that's what's causing the lag.
Exactly. It's a smart approach. If they can pinpoint the culprits, they can then focus their efforts on optimizing those specific areas.
Fingers crossed it works.
Me too, because a lag-free Cyrodiil would be glorious.
It would.
All right, so Cyrodiil performance is one big one. What else are they tackling?
Well, overworld combat difficulty is another big one.
Ah, yeah.
Which, let's be honest, is pretty much a snooze fest for veteran players.
Yeah, it's not exactly the most challenging content.
Not really. You could pretty much just waltz through most of it without breaking a sweat.
Exactly. And that's not very engaging or rewarding, is it? So they're looking at ways to make overworld combat more challenging.
But without alienating newer players.
Right. It's a tough balance to strike. You want to make the world feel dangerous, but you don't want to turn it into a meat grinder for those just starting out.
Maybe they could introduce, like, different difficulty levels for the overworld, so new players can ease into it and veterans can really test their skills.
That's an interesting idea. Maybe they could tie it into the champion system somehow.
Or maybe create specific areas or encounters that are designed for higher-level players, like mini-dungeons or world bosses that roam the overworld.
I like that. It would give us a reason to actually explore and engage with the world, not just use it as a fast travel network.
Okay, so we've got Cyrodiil performance, overworld difficulty. What else is on their list?
Oh, they're also experimenting with, how did they phrase it?
Combat feel.
Combat feel, yes.
Now, that's a tough one to quantify, isn't it?
It is. It's like, how do you measure how good combat feels?
That's subjective.
But they're looking at things like smoother animations, better visual effects, maybe even tweaking the audio to make combat more
impactful.
More impactful, yeah. More visceral.
Like you really feel the weight of your weapons and the power of your spells.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the visuals and the sound, it's also about the responsiveness, right?
Right. It's about that split-second delay between pressing a button and seeing your character react. They want to minimize that delay and make combat feel snappy and fluid.
I mean, that's something that a lot of action combat games struggle with.
It is, and it makes a huge difference in how satisfying combat feels.
Okay, so they're experimenting with existing systems, but they're also testing out brand new content, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. They mentioned something about high-end group content, like smaller, more focused versions of Craglarn.
And so like mini raids?
Yeah, something like that, designed specifically for group play and gear progression.
Which could be really cool, because sometimes you just don't have the time or the group size for a full-blown trial.
Right. Or maybe you just want a different kind of challenge, something a little more bite-sized.
Exactly. And it would give them more opportunities to experiment with different mechanics and encounter designs. Now, this is all great news for veterans like us, but what about those just starting their adventures in Tamriel? Or those returning after a break?
Well, they haven't forgotten about them either. In fact, they're making some pretty significant changes to improve the new and returning player experience.
Which is great, because let's be honest, ESO can be incredibly overwhelming for newcomers. It's a massive game with so much lore, so many systems, so much to do.
It's like walking into a giant library with no librarian to guide you.
Exactly. So what are they doing to make that initial experience a little less daunting?
Well, for PC players, they're developing a brand new patcher.
Okay.
Yeah, not the most exciting thing I know.
Not exactly a game changer.
But it's going to have improved visuals and performance, which is always a good thing.
Sure.
Plus, they're bringing back the original Wailing Prison tutorial for all new players.
Oh, nice. I actually loved that tutorial. It was a great introduction to the game's mechanics, and the story was pretty compelling, too.
Yeah, it was a classic.
And I think it did a much better job of easing players into the world than the current tutorial.
Agreed.
What else are they doing?
Well, to prevent new players from being bombarded with quest markers and feeling overwhelmed, they're going to hide prologue and chapter quest pins from the compass, at least initially.
So they can explore at their own pace, kind of organically discover those stories.
Exactly.
That's a good idea. What about visuals?
They're giving the starter island some visual upgrades.
Ooh, nice. Fresh coat of paint never hurts?
Nope. And it's important because those starter islands are the first thing new players see, right?
Yeah. First impressions matter.
Big time.
And for those of us who've been around for a while, they're finally updating the PC UI.
Hallelujah.
It's been a long time coming.
It has. They're streamlining things, making it more intuitive, more user-friendly.
And hopefully less clunky.
Fingers crossed.
They're also making improvements to the map and UI to help returning players find their bearings and, remember what they were doing before they took a break.
It's like, welcome back, here's where you left off, now go forth and conquer.
Okay, so we've talked about all these cool changes, but there's one big question that's been looming in my mind this whole time. With all this focus on seasons and experiments and new player experiences, what about the story?
Oh, the story's not going anywhere.
Really? Because I was worried that with chapters gone, we might see less focus on narrative content.
Nope. Firor was very clear about that. New quest content is still a top priority. It's just going to be delivered differently.
Okay, so how's it going to work?
Well, instead of these massive zone-based chapters, we're going to see more focused storylines spread out throughout the year. They mentioned continuing existing storylines, bringing back familiar characters, and maybe even splitting a large zone story across multiple updates.
So like releasing it in parts.
Yeah, kind of like an episodic format. It could lead to some really interesting twists and turns as the story unfolds over time.
That's actually a cool idea. It's like each season becomes its own little mini-series.
Exactly. And it keeps you engaged because you're constantly wondering what's going to happen next.
Okay, I'm on board with that. So we've got chapters out, seasons in, experiments galore. It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is.
And it's definitely sparked a lot of different reactions in the community. Some folks are ecstatic, some are worried, and some are just plain confused.
Yeah, it's understandable. It's a big change, and change can be scary.
Especially when it comes to a game you love.
Exactly. But, I think it's a good thing that ZOS is willing to take risks, to try new things, and to listen to what the players want.
Yeah, I agree. It shows that they're committed to keeping ESO fresh and evolving, and that they're not afraid to shake things up.
And at the end of the day, that's what's going to make ESO a better game for everyone.
Well said.
So let's hear what you all think. Are you excited about these changes?
Are you worried?
Fuse.
Head over to our forums or social media and let us know. We want to hear your thoughts, your hopes, your fears, your wildest predictions.
Because ultimately, the future of ESO is shaped by the passion and creativity of its community.
And we're all in this together.
So stay tuned because after a quick break, we're going to be sharing our own hopes and predictions for the future of ESO.
Okay, so we've broken down Matt Firor's letter. We've delved into the community's hopes and dreams and fears. And now it's time for the fun part.
The fun part? You mean rampant speculation?
Exactly. Let's put on our prophet robes and gaze into the future of ESO.
I always enjoy a good prophecy, especially when it involves the fate of Tamriel.
So let's get right to it. What are you most excited about?
Yeah.
Personally, as we head into this new world of seasons and experiments and who knows what else.
Honestly, I'm excited to see how this new model allows ESO to be more dynamic, more responsive. Imagine a game where the developers can react to feedback quickly, try new things without being tied to that rigid yearly schedule.
Right.
It's like they're trading in a giant, slow-moving ship for something sleek and fast.
Like a nimble little skiff.
Exactly. They can zip around, explore new ideas, change course quickly if something isn't working.
And with the shorter time frame for each season, we could see more focused, higher quality content. It's like each season is a mini expansion, right?
Yeah, I like that way of thinking. And think about the storytelling possibilities. We could get more frequent story beats, maybe even delve into some lesser-known corners of Tamriel or revisit familiar places, but with a totally new perspective.
Ooh, a season set in Black Marsh, exploring the history of the Argonians.
Or maybe a season that takes us back to the Second Era during the Interregnum.
The possibilities are kind of endless.
They really are. That's what makes this so exciting. This season's model opens up so many doors, so many potential avenues for exploration and innovation.
Okay, I'm getting swept up in all the excitement here. But let's be real for a second. What are some potential pitfalls? What challenges do you think ZOS needs to be mindful of as they, navigate this new territory?
Content fragmentation is definitely a valid concern.
Right.
They need to make sure these seasons feel like meaningful chapters in an ongoing narrative, not just, a random assortment of events and updates.
Like a bunch of disconnected side quests that don't really go anywhere.
Exactly. They need to weave it all together, make it feel cohesive.
And what about the solo players?
Yeah.
Will there still be enough content for those of us who prefer to, explore Tamriel at our own pace?
That's a good question, and one that I'm sure a lot of solo players are asking. ZOS has said that new quest content is still a priority, but it's going to be interesting to see how they balance that with the new season's model.
Another thing I'm a little worried about is the impact on the game's economy.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
More frequent content drops, new items, new crafting materials. It could really throw things out of whack.
Yeah. Inflation's a real concern.
Exactly. They need to be very careful about how they introduce new items and materials so they don't devalue existing ones.
It's a delicate balancing act, for sure.
Okay, enough with the cautious optimism. Time for some wild predictions. Hit me with your boldest, most outlandish prediction for the future of ESO.
Okay, let me see. I predict that within the next 5 years, ESO will introduce a fully functional in-game card game.
Whoa, hold on. Like a Tamriel-themed Gwent?
Exactly.
Okay, I love that idea.
Right.
They could tie it into existing lore,
Yeah.
create unique cards for each race and region, maybe even host tournaments with special rewards.
Yeah, and imagine the potential for player-created content. People could design their own decks, host their own tournaments, even create elaborate storylines around their card battles. It would be a whole new way to engage with the world.
Okay, that's a tough one to top, but I'm going to give it a shot. I predict that within the next few years, we'll get a season dedicated entirely to player housing.
Ooh, I like that one.
New furniture styles, interactive objects, maybe even the ability to craft our own furniture from materials we gather in the world.
Imagine the possibilities. They could even introduce, instance neighborhoods where you could visit your friends' houses, throw parties, really show off your decorating skills.
And imagine the housing market in ES.
The drama, the bidding wars.
The betrayals. Okay, I think we've officially gone off the rails here. But you know what? That's what makes this so exciting.
It does.
We're at the dawn of a new era for ES, and the possibilities really do feel endless.
It's like we're setting sail for uncharted waters. Who knows what we'll discover out there?
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. But before we go, we want to hear from you. What are you most excited about? What are your hopes for the future of ESO? Your fears? Your wild predictions?
Head over to our forums or social media and let us know. We want to hear it all.
Because at the end of the day, the future of ESO is shaped by all of us, by the passion and creativity of this amazing community. So keep exploring, keep adventuring, and keep those conversations going. We'll be back soon with more deep dives into all things ESO. Until then, may your adventures in Tamriel be filled with wonder and discovery,